My name is Charlton with Big C. This is Charlton and Big C Sports coming to you worldwide on the iHeartRadio network every Monday through Friday at 5 o'clock p.m. Pacific Standard Time worldwide on the iHeartRadio network. And Charlton and Big C Sports are on the number one media network in the United States of America. That's the iHeartRadio network. We're also voted the number one sports show in the universe, according to Big C. And it was good old boys, Big C. We also know that we have the new Star Wars movie coming out on the 16th, which is Friday. And they also pound out Charlton and Big C Sports on the Death Star. So what do they call that? A long time ago in the galaxy far, far away, Big C and Charlton was getting down in the universe, Big C, with Darth Vader, Big C. And also we want to say thank you to all of our friends in Latin America. So bienvenidos to you, as well as Paris, France, and London, England. And, of course, our good old friends from, I'm going to do my best, Big C. Oh, Canada, our home and native land. I think that's better than what I've done in the past, Big C. I hope they don't yell at me for that one. But there's no...
I'm going to have to get you to calm that down a little bit, bro. I'm trying to get them to have a pipeline, going back and forth between here and there. If they hear that type of disturbance on the beautiful national anthem, they may want to redact the deal that we got going on here, Joe. So, smooth that over just a little bit.
I'll try. It kind of sounds like Air Force One landing on Big C, but there's no one I love more than the land of the free and the home of the brave, Big C. How's it going for you good old boys trying to succeed from the Union, Big C?
We're making waves down here. We got the flow of the liquid on, and we're trying to get that alliance with those people in Northern Canada, and get that financial chain running back and forth between the two. It'll be, as they call it,
That's so funny, Big C. I love today being the 13th of December. We're counting down close to Christmas. Only about 12 days from Christmas. I know there's a lot of people who don't celebrate the Christmas season, so I'll just say happy holidays to you. But so much going on in the world of sports. And before we get into that, even just a little bit of good wishes passing along to the great Phil Mickelson. I think he had some hernia surgery, which is kind of like now with the way medical happens, Big C. That's an easy procedure for people. But when you look at Tiger Woods, when he started having surgery after surgery, and of course, some doctors, they're in the field of operating on people. They want to tell you do it. Now, we know that it cost Tiger Woods temporarily, Big C, because he started having more issues as he went under the knife, Big C. Any concerns for the great Phil Mickelson, Big C?
Well, you have to be, Charlton. It was sports hernia surgery, and that's in the groin area.
Yeah.
And when you think about athletes having that type of surgery, there's always torque on the body.
Yeah.
And when you look at a golfer's stance, the torque on his mid-torso, Charlton, when he's turning, that comes into play every swing. And so that's going to take away from your drive, from your wedges, Charlton. So these, and especially your irons.
Yeah.
So these are the things as a golfer that you have to be really concerned with. We're talking about a year recuperative time to come back from a surgery of that nature, Charlton. We've seen how long it's taken Tiger to come back from his wealth of surgeries, whether it's been the knee, it's been the back.
Yeah.
All of these things, they accumulate on the body. And that's the thing that people don't understand. When you look at a football player and you look at a basketball player, Charlton, you're looking at athletes at peak athletic performance ability.
Oh, yeah.
Because of the amount of weights that they lift, the conditioning aspects that they go through. When we look at golfers, we can see Joe the dentist out there playing golf. Okay, the guy that got off a tow truck and, look like John Daly.
Right.
So, that's what you look at in golf. You don't see peak performance athletes on the regular. When Tiger came onto the scene, people just awed at his physique.
Yeah.
How stealthy was, compared to the average golfer that was out there. Golfers have become more lean over the past decade.
Yeah.
But, these are not people who go in the weight room who lift 400, 500, 600 pounds bench press, squat 600, 700 pounds.
Yeah.
And so they're not going to recoup as fast from a tear of that nature and just rehabilitation as you would get a basketball player or a football player. So it's going to put Mickelson on the shelf for at least a year. And he's not a young man anymore. He's in his late 30s now, Charlton.
Yeah, and speaking of bench pressing,
the chances of him winning a tournament again are probably less than what Tigers are.
Yeah, and when you speak of bench pressing 400 and 500 pounds, I know I can't work out with you, Big C, but I can say that this segment is sponsored by your Northern California California Cadillac dealers, home of the all-new Cadillac Escalade, the standard of the world. And when you go by and test drive one, tell them that Charlton and Big C sent you. I think even guys like Mickelson drive the Escalade Big C. It has a lot of power in it. It has a lot of luxury in it. And you know, it also can carry mud quite well, Big C. When they say, what can Brown do for you? I thought I saw a brown UPS truck coming around the corner one day, but it was a guy with his muddy. He had a muddy Escalade. It was almost like yours, but his was white, Big C. Your thoughts on the dirtiness of that car, Big C?
Well, Charlton, you know, it's a trending thing nowadays to have a car that's not clean. That lets people know that you're keeping it in the garage.
Yeah.
You're utilizing the beauty and the power of that vehicle to go out and make it earn its glory. And that's what I do with my car, Charlton. I go out, I enjoy it. I don't want it sitting in the garage. Matter of fact, I park it under the trees, and the birds love it every now and then. So, you know, we got a few different stains on there that we don't want, but the mud helps keep it away.
There's nothing wrong with having birds, Big C. And speaking of birds, when I looked at the game from last night in the great Tom Brady Monday Night Football, it was a game that could have gone either way. It was a blowout win in a sense, but they just could not shake the Baltimore Ravens, and they kept coming back, especially in the second half, Big C. And Flacco was on his way to kind of leading, you know, comeback drive, but there's something about the New England Patriots. Tom Brady comes in first play after they had brought it to, I think, 23-20, and he throws a 70-yard touchdown pass, maybe about 40 yards and run for the other yards, Big C. But that's on one play because the safety was out of place. But it takes a veteran quarterback like a Tom Brady to find the guy open like that. How do they keep doing it with these no-name guys, and doesn't that take away from trying to get the first-round draft pick, Big C? Your thoughts?
Charlton, what you look at with the players that the Patriots bring in, they're not bringing in egotistical players.
Yeah.
And that's what happens when you get these high-round draft picks. You get guys that are egotistical. You get guys holding out. Joey Bosa, for example, with the Chargers.
Yeah.
Holding out all of the preseason, Charlton, and really hasn't been that impactful of a defensive player with the Chargers.
Yeah.
So, you know, this is what happens when you draft these guys. You pay them too much money. We look at the quarterbacks that were taking 1 and 2.
Yeah.
You know, the productivity has just not been there, Charlton. You even look at some of the high draft picks on the offensive line. You know, when you bring a player in that's hungry, a lower round draft pick, when you think about what he has to fight through in training camp, the mentality that he has to set forth to make the team, how determined he has to be, versus a number 1 draft pick, Charlton, who has a guaranteed contract that you're not going to cut. He's going to get paid for 3 to 4 years before you ever think about doing anything with him in a negative light. So that's what happens, Charlton, when we look at all professional sports now, and we look at the prima donna number 1 draft picks. Yes, these guys are talented, otherwise they wouldn't be drafted that high.
Exactly.
But when you look at the makeup of any team in the NFL, Charlton, how many starters on any team are number 1 draft picks? That's what you have to bring into consideration. There's a quandary of players that are free agents, that are 5th, 6th, 7th round draft pick, Charlton, that have been impactful players, even 4th rounders like Dak Prescott and Dallas. You know, these players are athletes. They're mentally strong, and I think their mental strength is better than a first-round draft pick, Charlton, because when they walk in, they have something to prove from day one. Especially you get a free agent. You know, they come in, and this is all they have. You know, this is their last chance. They know that any day they could be out of there, so they have a tendency to work harder than the high-round draft picks. And when you look at the longevity of their career, when you look at all the starting quarterbacks in the NFL, Charlton, how many are number 1 draft picks and how many are not? You know, you go up and down the ledger, and you see the lack of success of a lot of these number 1 draft picks. And I'm not just talking about the ones from this year, Charlton. I'm talking about the ones over the past decade that have not been productive in the league. And so, you know, you think about that and you say, why do I spend all that money on a first-round draft pick? Kirk Cousins, a 6th-round draft pick in Washington. Andy Dalton, a 2nd-round draft pick in Cincinnati, even though they're having a down year this year.
Well, you know,
when you look at what they've done in their career, is it worth spending a first-round draft pick on a quarterback that you don't know anything about?
And when you think about quarterbacks, you know, Big C, Brady was not a first-round draft pick, but last night he had 406 yards passing. He became at least the 4th NFL quarterback with 450 career touchdown passes, and he also threw his 2nd interception of the season. And here we are going on 3 games left on the year, Big C. Another great thing that happened for the Patriots, and they will need this guy, and you've been talking about it all season long. LeGarrette Blount, 18 carries, 72 yards, went over the 1,000-yard mark last night. So they're going to have a guy by the end of the season. He's going to be around 12 to 1,300 yards rushing, and that's what they're going to have to count on in the playoffs as you're playing better teams and as you have a guy that has to ground the football, and that's what they have Blount for. When I look at Flacco had a decent game, 37 of 52, 324 yards and 2 touchdowns. But they were down at one point, 23-3. And you always bring up this $100 million quarterback sample, Big C. And what I like about the great Tom Brady compared to some of these other guys, if there's any quarterback in the NFL that could command Andrew Luck type of money, wouldn't it be Tom Brady, Big C? But he doesn't do that. Why is his ego so small that he's willing to put his team first? But you have other guys that they want all the money. They want to be the first one and the last one to the dinner table, Big C. What makes Tom Brady so different, Big C?
Well, you think about quarterbacks, Charlton, on a legacy versus fan pocket. It's not that Brady will ever be broke, okay?
Yeah.
He's laid his money in his career. But when you compare the 2 quarterbacks who played last night, Charlton, Flacco makes $8.5 million more a year than what Brady does.
And he showed it last night. Could you tell what $8 more million does for you last night, Big C? Could you see the difference?
we see that throughout the entire season about these multi-million-dollar quarterbacks, that the media loves them. He's a franchise player. You know, how many of these franchise quarterbacks, Charlton, are making the playoffs?
Wow.
When you go up and down the ledger and you look at these $100 million quarterbacks, how many of them are making the playoffs? Quarterbacks even make $20 million. They don't even have to have a 5-year contract to get to $100 million.
Yeah.
Quarterbacks that are making $20 million, Charlton, how many of them are making the playoffs? And are any of them in jeopardy of losing their job? You know, it's like we talked about Dak Prescott earlier. 4th-round draft pick, has Dallas at 11-2 record. And when you just got to talking about a guy who threw for over 400 yards last night.
Yeah.
His team has the same record, okay?
Yeah.
He has 2. That team has 2 losses. Are anybody talking about benching Brady?
No, but Brady doesn't play. But Brady doesn't play for Jerry Jones, Big C. That's why he would try to bench Tom Brady too, Big C. It's just his ego, Big C. That's why he does that, Big C.
But you know, I'm looking at the mainstream media cry for Tony Romo. Okay, Tony Romo. What has Tony done for you lately?
Well, Tony won 4 games last year, Big C. He won 4 games last year, and that's what they want now, Big C. It would take him 2.5 years to do what Prescott has done, and he still has 3 games to go, Big C.
No, he didn't win 4, Johnson. He won 2.
Oh, 2? Okay.
He won 2. Dallas won 4. He won 2. He won as many games last year as Prescott has lost this year, Johnson.
Wow.
And yet they're calling for Prescott's head. You know, and they've been calling for it for weeks, ever since they put Romo on the active roster 3 weeks ago. And you look at the play calling since Romo has been on the roster, that has changed.
Yeah.
So, you know, this is coming from the coaching and the owner. It's not just Prescott. It's coming from changing up what he can do offensively, limiting his play cycle.
Yeah.
So when you think about that, you have the continuity of the best team in the league rolling well. All of a sudden, the owner constantly wants to put his hand in the mix. You know, you can't put 2 hands in the Kool-Aid. All of a sudden, you mess with one hand.
Or even in the moonshine. Imagine trying to put 2 hands in a mayonnaise jar, Big C. You can't do that. You get your hands stuck up in that thing, Big C. Maybe Jerry Jones got his...
Here's the thing, you know, he's talking about replacing Prescott, who has an equal record with what the Patriots have.
Yeah.
And there's no quandary in New England who's the top quarterback.
Yeah.
There's no quandary in any other team in the league, Charlton. There's no quandary about Flacco being the top quarterback
so let me,
in Baltimore, even though they won't make the playoffs.
Yeah, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this question, Big C. You've known a lot of GMs and coaches over the years, Big C, guys that don't even play the game and guys that have passed on, Big C. But why doesn't Robert Kraft do the same thing to Tom Brady that Jerry Jones is trying to do to Prescott, because they're in first place, but they're already talking about either resting Prescott or replacing him with a backup guy that can't get you more than 2 wins last year? What's the difference in Robert Kraft and Jerry Jones, Big C?
Well, Charlton, let's even look at the history of the Dallas Cowboys. They had a quarterback several years ago named Troy Aikman, okay?
Yeah.
Jimmy Johnson had talked about resting Troy Aikman when they got to the playoffs.
Yeah.
Even when they had the division sewed up, Troy Aikman played all the way through. And Troy Aikman is an announcer now, and he's even calling for Romo.
Yeah.
This is something no one did to him during his career, okay?
No.
When you talk about resting momentum, you can't do that because you can't get momentum back when you sit players down, Jonathan. There's been many teams that has proven throughout the history of all professional sports.
Yeah.
When you start sitting down your starters, they lose that continuity and momentum that they built for the entire season.
Well, yeah.
You know, you got 5 months in the off season to rest.
Yeah.
So no player wants to sit down and say, hey, I need a week off right now. You get 2 byes during the season in the NFL, at least one.
Yeah.
So there's nobody who's any worse beat up than anybody else. And a quarterback generally takes less of a beating than the offensive lineman. So if anybody need a rest, Charlton, it's your offensive lineman.
Yeah.
Not your quarterback who take a pounding every play and your defensive lineman who take a pounding every play.
Yeah.
But you want to talk about the rhythm between the running backs and the continuity between the receivers that you want to disrupt because you got this guy that you had an affair with for a couple of years that you never married.
Yeah.
You know, and you want to see him one more time. Okay.
It's almost like you look at Donald Trump. Let's contrast Donald Trump and then the great Jerry Jones. Like Donald Trump, what does he have? 3 or 4 wives now, Big C? 3 or 4 wives. And back in the day, he was bragging about having affairs, and he even put his affairs in the newspaper, Big C. He was taking pictures with the cheerleaders and trying to sleep with all the cheerleaders from the Miami Dolphins and various other teams. And that's the way he rolls, right? But could you imagine he says he respects all women, and there's nothing wrong with having that many girlfriends if that's how you get down. But he did it when he had wives, and there's nothing wrong with that too if that's how you get down. But I wonder if his opinion of himself is different than his first 2 or 3 wives, Big C. And that's the thing with Jerry Jones. Sometimes you have so much money, they have what's called FU money. So Jerry Jones, at sometimes, he's telling the whole world that he would rather lose with a white quarterback than win with a black one. And people may not think that's true, but that's a lot of pressure down in those good old southern states. But it also happened in Pittsburgh under Joe Gilliam and Terry Bradshaw when Gilliam had 11 wins too, Big C. Can you draw any comparison? And before you do, I just want to say that this segment is sponsored by your California Lottery. What can a buck do for you? If you're going to look at playing the lotto, the Mega Millions is up to about $35 million, and the Powerball is over $100 million. Big C, I keep saying it's won by Charlton and Big C Sports because I'm going to keep saying it until we win it. I think the thing I got different than some of the pastors is every time I call the pastors, they ask me for money when I ask them to pray for me, Big C. So what we got to do is start praying for the lotto people to give us the money. Does that make any sense, Big C?
What you got to do is ask the pastors for a loan, about your couple bucks, and you'll bring them your time, and you bring that 10% back out of that money that they loan you. That will be blessed. That will pay for that lottery ticket.
Well, one pastor told me he wanted a love offering. I said, well, Pastor, I'm married. He said, no, a love offering when you give money to the church. I said, well, how much money do you want me to give? He said, give us whatever in your heart. I said, there's nothing in my heart to give right now, Pastor. But I just thought that was funny. It's called the love offering, Big C. But back to love offerings, the great Jerry Jones and what he's doing. I think the Pittsburgh Steelers did the same thing back under Chuck Noll when he had we pulled off Terry Bradshaw off the bench, Big C. Do you recall that day back in the day, Big C?
Well, you know, the difference with that, Charlton, I mean, it was a similar type scenario where Joe Gilliam came in, took the team to the playoffs, and they replaced him with Bradshaw. But the difference was Bradshaw had a history of winning, okay? He had already won a Super Bowl.
True. That's true.
He had injuries. And so this team were prepared for him to come back, even though it destroyed Joe Gilliam mentally.
Yeah.
I don't think that Dallas has enough history with Tony Romo that you want to make that move, because when do you have the game by bringing Romo in after having a successful season and breaking up the continuity? You got to also understand, Jonathan, his game timing will not be there.
Yeah.
You bring a guy in, he's not used to playing under that pressure week in, week out.
Yeah.
His game conditioning will not be there.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think even more so, Charlton, is that the players that have developed this relationship all season long with Prescott will be hurt mentally and timing-wise.
Yeah.
So the greater need is for the team, not the individual.
Yeah.
If they win a Super Bowl, Romo gets a Super Bowl ring regardless.
Yeah.
Just like Bledsoe did in New England.
But
when Brady came in and replaced Bledsoe, Bill Belichick didn't see the need to put Bledsoe back in after the run that they were having and made it to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Bledsoe got a Super Bowl ring. He's a member of that Super Bowl team as a quarterback.
Yeah.
He just wasn't the starting quarterback. And when you look at it, Charlton, there's thousands of players, trust me, thousands of players that have played in the NFL that have Super Bowl rings that never took a snap.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
That never took a snap. So there's no sense of lack of pride in wearing a Super Bowl ring around, Charlton. So when you look at a backup quarterback, how many backup quarterbacks have gotten into the Super Bowl?
Yeah.
Not many, Charlton.
Yeah, that's true, Big C. But you know, there's something that's very powerful in the world of business, and it's called the Good Old Boy Network. It's not about Prescott being an African-American, but when you look at Dallas and you look at the whole state of Texas, there are still some issues about that. There's the leadership thing, and I'm not saying that's a big issue because he did draft the guy, even kind of begrudgingly, but do you know who wants Jerry Jones to start Romo more than anybody else, Big C?
Who is that, Charlton?
All the 31 other owners in the league, especially the 15 that are going to be competing against Dallas for the playoffs. Pete Carroll would love. In fact, he'll probably call and even offer him some fish to pull Dak Prescott and start Tony Romo because he knows they're going to have to go through Dallas to win the Super Bowl, Big C. The great Pete Carroll's not a dummy, Big C. And so when you think about that, it's always sometimes ego will get in your way of common sense. And if a guy's too dumb to see that a guy that's starting has 11 wins out of 13 games, and the games they lost, they were down to the wire. It's not like they lost close games. In both games, the first game, the receiver didn't get out of bounds where they could have kicked the field goal in the red zone. And then you had one of the most argumentative receivers that they've ever had for the Dallas Cowboys dropping passes, Big C. So they can blame who they want. But I'm hoping if you're all the other team, you want to call Jerry Jones and say, please put Tony Romo back in the game, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, you know, if Dallas wins 2 more games, Charlton, they secure home field advantage throughout the playoffs.
Yeah.
Okay? And basically Super Bowl advantage because the Super Bowl will be played in Houston.
Yeah.
So they don't have to leave the state throughout the playoffs in the Super Bowl if they get that far, Charlton. But all of those games will be in a climate control scenario, being inside of Texas Stadium, Charlton.
Yeah.
The AT&T Stadium in Dallas.
Yeah.
And also at Reliance Stadium in Houston.
Yeah.
So, you know, to have Prescott in those pristine conditions, we saw how the elements affected both quarterbacks in New York last week, Charlton. You know, Manning didn't have a great game. The ball was slick.
Yeah.
Players slipping down on the field. Now, you're going to have a fast track in Dallas.
Yeah.
I don't see Prescott not recovering this week coming into Dallas, Charlton. I see him getting back in stride to his old self because he's going to know that the pressure's on him. He just needs to relax and be Dak Prescott.
Yeah.
Not worry about the media that has belittled him for 14 weeks now.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Up
yeah.
and down, and, you know, Tony Romo, the cripple guy will be back.
Yeah.
That's what they keep saying.
And Big
But,
C,
you know, leave Tony Romo out of the equation. Be happy with what you have. Okay?
Well, I think there's 31 owners and coaches that would love to see Jerry Jones bring back Romo, Big C. That's just real talk, Big C. Another thing going on in the world of sports, and when you talk about players and teams, there's this talk about the Oakland Raiders. They actually passed a vote today to consider a $1.3 billion football stadium in the Bay Area, Big C, as opposed to the $1.9 billion down in Las Vegas. So that would save the ownership some money. They do owe Alameda County about $100 million. But I want to just congratulate Ronnie a lot because he and his group are making a push along with the mayor, Mr. Scaff of Oakland. They're trying to do what it takes to keep jobs there. You don't lose the identity of a pro franchise, especially even Mayor Kevin Johnson was at the meeting yesterday, and you know the Sacramento Kings, they were always talked about moving down to Anaheim or Las Vegas or Seattle or someplace on the East Coast, and it was only when Mayor Johnson stepped in, and he did it with an investment group, and now they have the new Golden One Center, which Adam Silver says is arguably the best arena in the NBA here in the state's capital. So if you can do it in Sacramento, you can do it in the Bay Area with over 7 million people in the metropolitan area. I also want to say this segment is sponsored by United Labor, guaranteed life insurance up to $100,000 with no medical questions. And also we are endorsed by the American Heart Association and the American Cancer Society. We work with all of the unions under the AFL-CIO, and we're also, Big C, looking to hire over 1,000 licensed insurance brokers all over the country. We can put people back to work. Imagine having a job where you don't have to fly outside of the country like Donald Trump's employees to get to work, Big C. Wouldn't that be a great thing if people came to work for United Labor under Big C Sports? You can also find out about it on the iHeartRadio network. And you can also tweet out to Big C Sports at Yes Charlton on Twitter. Again, when you're looking to go to work, just reach out to Charlton and Big C Sports. Now, Big C, another thing that came up in the world of sports, we look at basketball, and there's all of this talk about having these super teams, right? The Golden State Warriors, they've lost 4 games this year, Big C. Last year, I think they went about 23. They were up to 33 wins before they lost the game. I think it's actually going to help them in the long run. They don't have as much tension. Or is that a stupid thing to say, Big C? Your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, the biggest difference is not Kevin Durant this year with the Golden State Warriors. It's the loss of Barnes and a couple other key players, Charlton, and also the loss of Luke Walton.
Yeah.
Well, when you look at what they had at the beginning of last season, Steve Kerr was only the second-best coach on that team last year, Charlton, even though he won NBA Coach of the Year.
Yeah.
He was the second-best head coach that they had last year, and that award that he got was undeserved, even though he won it.
Yeah.
But, when you look at what this team has done, Charlton, you're not going to repeat what you did last year. That was a once-in-a-lifetime run. The Bulls only won 72 games one time, Charlton.
Yeah, that's true.
One time in their illustrious 6-game championship run. So when you think about it, the Lakers only eclipsed that 70-win streak one time during their run, Charlton, when they had set the NBA record. So when you look at records like that in the NBA, that's not what you're gunning for. Think about how many teams in the NFL have been undefeated. One, the Dolphins, for the entire season. But even though the Patriots won more games in one year than what the Dolphins did, they lost the Super Bowl.
And the Dolphins,
so no one looks at it as a perfect season.
Yeah, but the Dolphins, they didn't have the toughest schedule when they won those 14. They only played 14 games. It was not the toughest schedule either, Big C. Taking nothing away from them, but that team, that New England team that got beat in the Super Bowl, they would have beaten that Dolphin team by 2 or 3 touchdowns, Big C. I mean, going back in era is one thing because players are a lot bigger, stronger, and faster now. But I would be more impressed with a team even going 16-0 than a team that went, undefeated back in the day when the Dolphins played, taking nothing away from them. But they're a lot better athletes now, Big C. Your thoughts?
Oh, yeah, that's true. New England went 19-0 before they lost the game, Charles.
Yeah.
So that's still the longest winning streak in NFL history in a single season.
Yeah.
So you can't take that away from them. Regardless of the Dolphins' perfect season, New England has the longest winning streak in a regular season. But when you look at the NBA, Charlton, as where these teams are, you want to make the playoffs. You want to make the second season.
Yeah.
Golden State is going to make the second season in the NBA, and that's where it comes down to. Are you healthy when you get to the playoffs? Has the team developed, that continuity that you're looking for? So I don't put that much strain, in the first 50 games of the NBA season. It's nice, but, all you need is the last 30 to get your team together.
Yeah.
And you have your players healthy. Golden State will be fine. There's really no challenge in the West. The team that people thought would challenge them, the Clippers, the Clippers keep self-destructing.
Yeah.
Every time you turn around, they're going on a 5-6 game losing streak, and people say, what happened to the Clippers? Well, it's the same old Clippers. That's all it is.
Yeah, they have a hard time putting it together. And no matter how good they are, they're always second fiddle to the Lakers, Big C. And Sacramento got a big win over the Lakers last night up at Golden One Center in Sacramento. Cousins, again, went for over 30 points. And you said, Walton got thrown out of the game because he's trying to let the officials know he didn't appreciate some of the antics that was going on by the Kings players. But I just think that there's so much to talk about in the world of the NBA. When you look at the Clippers, they had a 121-120 win over the Trailblazers. And when Blake Griffin may be your best player, he had a triple-double last night, 26 points, 12 rebounds. And I'm telling you, this kid, he's always there, but he's not the LeBron James factor. He's not the Kevin Durant factor. He's not the Steph Curry factor. And I don't think that they're going to go that far with him, even though they may challenge San Antonio for that second spot, Big C. But Blake Griffin, Chris Paul's there also, but they just don't have the same manpower that you have at a Golden State. But San Antonio is so well coached, Big C. It's always going to be who's going to challenge in the West against Golden State. I think it's going to be San Antonio again. Maybe the Clippers with an outside chance. When you look at the East, who's going to challenge Cleveland? You still got to look at Boston, and you look at Toronto. They have a very good team up there as well, Big C. Your thoughts?
Well, don't forget about the Memphis Grizzlies, Jonathan. And they've been on a hot streak. I think they've won 13 of their last 16 games.
Yeah.
They lost Mike Conley, their point guard, really the highest paid player in the NBA when you look at the structure of his contract. And without him, they've been a better team because they've had to rely more on team play than this one superstar trying to dominate the ball at point guard. So, the NBA is a long season. It's about being healthy. You talked about the Clippers. They lost Griffin, and they lost CP3 last year in the playoffs, and it really hurt their team.
Yeah.
You look at Toronto, who can challenge you in the East. They have a well-rounded, franchise that had the second-best win record last year in the East. So, there's some players in the East. We know that Cleveland is the stalwart out there. As long as you have LeBron James, you're the mountain that people have to climb.
Yeah.
The king is not going to lay down for anybody.
Yeah.
So, you look at Cleveland, and there's always number 2 and 3 after that. But Cleveland is the surefire choice in the East. We're looking at Golden State in the West, Charlton.
Yeah.
We can get to Christmas and start the playoffs at that point because that's where it's going to be.
Yeah, well, sometimes when LeBron James has his posse and for some reason Phil Jackson still won't apologize. I guess he's a Zen master. But I think LeBron also, he's man enough to just go and win more games and knock them out in the playoffs if the Knicks can get there. But I just think sometimes you need publicity, and sometimes people make their own publicity, Big C. Even when you look at publicity around the league, some of the top teams right now in the NBA, if you look at the Western Conference, which everyone favors the Western Conference because of Golden State and the Clippers, it even looks like the Kings might even challenge for a number 8 spot if they play consistent ball down the stretch, Big C. But Golden State's number 1, and they're followed by the Clippers at number 2. In the Midwest, you have Oklahoma City, and then Utah, and then you have Portland. Now, at Oklahoma City, Westbrook is a stud, but I don't think he has the firepower by himself. He can go out and get all the triple-doubles he wants and the rebounds and the assists, but he's going to shoot himself out of energy by the time the playoffs get around. Big C, your thoughts?
Charlton, he's a workhorse. If you look at how he's played throughout his career, he's always played with this high level of intensity. You can go back to his days at UCLA, and he's always played that way. No holds barred. He's going to give 110% every night, and that's just his makeup. You got to get the rest of the team to play to his level. The team has had some diversity this year because you no longer have Durant, so other players have had to step up, like Adams at center.
Yeah.
He's developed nicely. His game is much more improved this year. But the real team you got to look at there in that division, Charlton, is Houston. Houston is a team that has won 7 in a row.
Yeah.
And Mike D'Antoni has them playing his type of basketball the way he had the Phoenix Suns playing several years ago when he was the head coach down there.
Yeah.
You think about it, he's taken James Harden and made him a point guard, and this guy is one of the top assisters in the NBA right now, Charlton, as well as one of the top scorers. So he's changed James Harden's mindset and game to be more of a team player. And this is what you look at from a coach. Can you develop the personnel that you have?
Yeah.
Mike D'Antoni has done that in Houston, so Houston is going to be a challenge in that Midwestern division.
Yeah, and they came into Golden State and knocked off the Golden State Warriors. They have a lot of tenacity going for the ball and for the rebounds, Big C. They're right behind San Antonio, just a game behind San Antonio and Memphis. So someone in that conference, in that Midwest is going to, in the Southwest is going to knock each other off. But again, when we go back to the Eastern Conference, do you think the Eastern Conference is taken for granted because everyone's thinking about Cleveland, maybe even getting the calls down the stretch? When you look at in the Atlantic Division, Toronto, they're 17-7, followed by New York. And then Boston's is a good team that play fundamental defense. You have Charlotte in the Southeast. They're up there with Atlanta. Atlanta's a good team, but it seems to be not quite at the upper echelon of teams, Big C. And also, when you round out on the Eastern Conference, you look at teams like Cleveland and Chicago, and then Indiana's also a decent team, Big C. But if there's an upset in the West, we talk about maybe San Antonio or even Memphis or even Houston, or maybe even the Clippers knocking off Golden State. Who would knock off the Cleveland Cavaliers outside of Toronto? Do you see Atlanta having that kind of moxie, Big C? Or maybe even someone like Chicago, Big C? Your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, I just don't see that powerful team in the East to go out and win a 7-game series against the Cavaliers, Charlton.
Yeah.
You may win 1 or 2, but you're not going to win a 7-game series against the Cavaliers. They're not going to allow that. The NBA is not going to allow that to happen, Charlton.
Yeah.
So this is a team that is destined to be back in the finals again. When you look at the NBA, and you can talk about building super teams, Charlton.
Yeah.
But, there's really no super team. Miami was not a super team, even though they made the playoffs a lot of times. Cleveland's not a super team. Golden State is not a super team because you would go through the season without a loss if you were a super team.
Yeah.
But anybody can lose on any given night. We saw the Warriors last year lose 3 consecutive games in the playoffs.
Yeah.
An unheard of feat. You're 3-1 and you lose the championship. So are there super teams? No.
Yeah.
Are there competitive teams in the NBA? Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what you look for, is a competitive environment, because you want to create the best opportunity for the fans, Charlton.
Yeah.
That's what you're trying to do. These players are all great athletes, all great competitors. They're not going to go out there and take a lay down for somebody else to embarrass them on the court on any given night.
Yeah, and speaking of that, Big C, this segment is sponsored by One Life America Life Insurance. We're the leaders in the country when it comes to final expense. Tweet out the Charlton and Big C Sports. Now, we're also trying to hire over 1,000 licensed insurance brokers, because we simply want to put people back to work. Tweet out the Charlton and Big C Sports. You also got to understand this statement that sports is $1 billion industry, and Charlton and Big C Sports on the iHeart Radio is on the biggest platform in the United States, Big C. Over 250 million people per month listen to the iHeart Radio platform, Big C. And also, if you're looking for athletic insurance or event insurance, we get you covered with Charlton and Big C Sports. Just tweet out to us if you're looking to get covered for an athlete, all the way from Pop Warner football all the way up to the professionals. Charlton and Big C Sports has you covered. Also, Big C, I want to just run down a couple of scores from last night before we get into a little bit of college football. Around the NBA last night, it was the Kings with a big win over the rival Lakers, 116-92. The first time the Lakers came to the new Golden One Center, it was Indiana 110 over Charlotte 94, and it was Miami 112-101 over Washington. Toronto, we talked about how good they are, 122-100 over Milwaukee. Houston with a great team, 122-118 over Brooklyn. Dallas 112 and Denver 92. It was the Clippers 121 and Portland 120. One of the most anticipated games tonight, though, Big C. The Cleveland Cavaliers playing the Memphis Grizzlies. They're a 13-point favorite at home, Big C. Atlanta's favorite against Atlanta. Chicago's favorite by 7 over Minnesota. Golden State is favored by 10 over New Orleans. New York is a 3.5-point favorite over Phoenix. And Portland is a 1-point favorite over Oklahoma City. Any game you're looking forward to watching tonight, Big C, before we run over some rankings in college basketball, Big C?
Well, look, Dalton, it's always going to be competitive. You got Tom Thibodeau going back to Chicago with the Minnesota Timberwolves.
Yeah.
That's going to be a very interesting matchup. Can he get his new team over his old team? You got Memphis playing Cleveland tonight. Now, Memphis has been hot.
Yeah.
But you're going into Cleveland, and we talked about them being the best team in the East, and I think they will prevail in that game. A team that really needs to find a way to win a game is the New York Knicks. They're going to be facing Phoenix tonight, Charlton.
Yeah.
Phoenix can go on the road and beat, the Knicks are in Phoenix tonight, so, this is a game when they're on the road, they don't play that well away from the Garden. So these are some pivotal games tonight, Charlton, in the NBA, but, I look at Cleveland, shutting down Memphis, letting reestablishing that dominance in the East, letting people know that they're a formidable opponent,
yeah,
and they're looking to get on another championship run.
Well, Big C, we know champions are made, and when you talk about some of the things that I love what you bring up, it's not always about who has the best players. It's about who has the best chemistry, and that's something you don't want to destroy. And when you look at the world of college basketball, we talk about the NBA, and there's so many teams in college basketball, Big C. We talk about the top 25. You have number 1, Villanova, they're 10-0, and you have number 2, UCLA. They are also 10-0, followed by Kansas 9-1, and then Baylor is 9-0, Big C, and Duke rounds out the top 5, and they are 10-1. The reason that college basketball doesn't have the same appeal that the NBA has is, number 1, I think there's 2 reasons. Number 1, you don't stay long enough to recognize who's playing with who, Big C. That's number 1. Number 2, as you become more intelligent, it's hard to watch people getting exploited. In football, where they play it 1 day a week, basketball, they're 3 days a week being exploited flying around the country. Your thoughts, Big C?
Well, look, Jonathan, you spoke about it so well when you talk about players don't stay around where you can develop fanfare.
Yeah.
If you have a great player in college basketball, if he does 2 years with your team, he's gone. So you're always retooling. I mean, students stay around twice as long as basketball players do. Yeah. So you don't get that competitive streak might be a high-ranked team all the time, but you don't get a chance to build a dominant legacy. When you look at teams like John Wooden had back in the 70s at UCLA, where you had consecutive championships. You look at Denny Crum back at Louisville in the 70s and 80s, who was a student of John Wooden before getting the head coaching job at Louisville, who had several championship seasons at the University of Louisville. These are the type of coaches you don't see anymore, where you have rivalries that are built up. When you look at Dean Smith, when he was at North Carolina for that long run that he had there, John Thompson at Georgetown. These coaches built programs. They had players who stayed around for 3 and 4 years, Johnson, who got their degrees. And that's what you looked at developing. But, you could come to that arena 3 years in a row and see the same
players. Same
players. You don't get that in college basketball anymore, Johnson. The urgency is to leave. And when you look at the number of teams in the NBA, you got 30 teams, Johnson. You got 30 teams, but you got 2 rounds in the NBA draft, Johnson. Only the first round draft pick is guaranteed a contract. But when you sit there and you got 42 last year's draft, 42 underclassmen declared for the draft, Charlton. 42. And that's not even bringing in the European players. But you have 42 underclassmen declared for the draft. Who in the hell is advising these young men that your future is on the line and you could be without a job, you could be without a scholarship, you could be on the street? Because everybody's not going to make a team, Charlton. You have guys coming from the D-League that are coming back in, all these different leagues. So no one is prepping these young men, Charlton, telling them that your future is to stay in college, develop your game a little longer. Because you only have 30 first-round draft picks that are 30 guaranteed contracts. Everybody else is a wait and see. So the NCAA doesn't do a lot of things right as we look at it nowadays, Charlton. They don't pay the players. That's why the basketball players leave. But they force the football players to stay in college. Think about it. You allow a basketball player to leave after 1 year to seek money. But a football player has to stay in for at least 3 years. Based on his graduation class from high school. So how do you have this different level? Because why, Charlton? Look how much money football teams make in comparison to what basketball teams make. Okay? You get a basketball arena, a huge basketball arena in a college setting, Charlton, is 20,000, okay? When certain conferences and teams where you have these 100,000-seat football stadiums, all right? So one football game, Charlton, equals 4 to 5 basketball, say 5 basketball games. All right? You only get 33 basketball games, Charlton, before the regular season. So you're really exceeding on the football stadium what you're making in basketball. So this is the reason why they force football players to stay in college for 3 years, Charlton, versus basketball players. It's purely economics. They can exploit these players longer, make more revenue off of them what they can with the basketball players.
And that's not going to change as long as the free labor is there. And I hope, we talked about it a lot last year, Big C, and Jay Bilas came on the scene, and we didn't see him after maybe a week, but it's really something that I hope they can solve. When we look at some of the women basketball team, you have number 1 ranked UConn. They're 9-0. Notre Dame is number 2. They're 9-1, followed by Baylor. Baylor has a good men and women's basketball program, Big C, a private school out of Waco. They're also undefeated, Big C, and they're 10-1, not undefeated, but 10-1, followed by number 4 Maryland at 10-0, and number 5 Mississippi State at 9-0. Now, one thing that we bring up that the women athletes tend to do more than the men athletes, Big C, is they tend to stay at least 4 years, and they tend to get their degrees because they're not being goaded by these pro leagues that are saying we're going to give you a $100 million contract, Big C. And there's nothing wrong with capitalism, being able to make your money. I just hate the game of exploitation and how they're trying to get more and more games. But something came out that you and I have been talking about in the last year, Big C. When we look at some of these bowls, they always want to expand the bowl games, Big C, because they're having a hard time getting sponsorship for some of these ancillary college football bowl games. Now, March Madness goes to, 68 games now, Big C? You have play-in games. Used to be the Match 64. Now they have a play-in game. They're even having the NIT. Again, that's just more money grab that they're getting for these colleges, Big C. But I think what you said is happening. there's so much unreasonableness, if that's going to be a word, Big C. I think unreasonable is a word. But they're taking teams from California, flying them down to Florida for a bowl game. Schools from Texas going up to Boise for a basketball, or actually a football game, Big C. It just doesn't make any sense. And now you can see in the papers, they're finally catching on to what you were talking about. If they regionalize it and make these games a home game for some of these teams, I think it would make a lot of sense, Big C. I think that has to be the way it goes, especially if they're starting to lose some of the sponsorship. I don't think they're losing as much sponsorship, Big C, as they are just the cost is going up because more of the coaches want to get in on the money grab. Your thoughts, Big C?
When you think about it, Johnson, it just doesn't make sense from a fan's perspective. Isn't that what the game was built for? Isn't that what the bowl season was built for the fans' perspective, Johnson?
Yeah.
To have, your alumni, to have your student body. Think about it. How many students, Johnson, can travel on a week to 2-3 week notice, 1,500 miles across the country during Christmas time to follow your team, Johnson? You just can't do it.
Well, if they got to ride with LeBron James and his posse, if they got to ride with LeBron James and his posse, Big C, then maybe they could get across the country that way. But outside of that, they'd have a hard time doing it.
Well, that's what they're all going to be called, Johnson.
Yeah.
When you look at any home stadium, Johnson, in college football, and you look at the student section, Johnson, the greatest section in the stadium, because they're true fans. They believe in their university. They believe in their players. A lot of them know the players.
Yeah.
Personally, they live in the same dorms. They go to the same classes. So they have a personal relationship with them, Johnson.
Yeah.
And you lose that when you take these teams 1,500 miles across the country to a place that the students cannot get to. You might have a handful, 100, 200 students, Johnson, that can attend. You might have 2,000, 3,000 boosters.
Yeah.
That might be able to attend. But that's not the 85,000, Charlton, that you'll have in a home stadium. And so when you get to this favorite stadium that you're going to go to, Charlton, and you got 25,000 fans and 60,000 empty seats, it's no fun for anybody.
Yeah.
As a player, it's one of the most disheartening things that you never have when you look up and you see no one in the stands.
Yeah.
Because it shows a lack of interest in that local area. And so how do you give your all, Charlton, when no one's interested in watching you play?
Yeah.
That's the emotional drain that a player has because they're people. Sports is driven by emotions, Charlton. If you saw an NBA Finals and you looked up in the stands and there was, 8,000 people in a 22,000 seat arena, how do you think those players would perform?
Oh, not very good. Not very good at all.
We just saw the Big C World Series, Charlton, where tickets were going for as high as $25,000.
Wait. What was the name of that World Series, Big C?
The Big C World Series.
For Charlton and Big C Sports. Yeah.
Where tickets were going for $25,000. There were more people outside in each one of those stadiums in Cleveland and Chicago, Charlton, than what they could get inside. So, and you look at how competitive the World Series was, Charlton, from the emotional draw that the players were getting from the fans. And I was fortunate enough to play in a few championship games in my career, Charlton.
Yeah.
And the adrenaline that you got from the fans, your heart was racing the whole time. I mean, you're hyperventilating. But if we'd have walked into an empty stadium, Charlton, it's like going out for, pre-game warm-ups when nobody's in the stadium and you don't even have your shoulder pads on. You're not really stoked.
Yeah.
But when you come back out of that locker room, prior to that kickoff, and you get this roar from the crowd, Charlton, and adrenaline starts pumping, you can't do anything but be enthusiastic. And this is what the NCAA, Charlton, is taking away from its players.
Yeah.
From these players that they're making millions and millions of dollars off of, is that they're not affording them the luxury to have that adrenaline and being close to home where they can have packed stadiums for possibly a lot of them, Charlton, their last collegiate game ever played. The NCAA is getting it all wrong.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Big C. And this final segment is sponsored by Beneath His Wings Foundation.org and also CYNN Entertainment. When it comes to promotions, Cynthia Evans, she's the best in Northern California. Tweet out to Charlton and Big C Sports. And Big C, I'm always singing my Oh Canada, my favorite song. I'm doing the best I can. Just want to pay some homage to some NHL hockey scores. And we had Monday, we had Pittsburgh 7, Arizona nothing. It was Boston 2-1 over Montreal in overtime. Tonight, we have the Los Angeles at Buffalo, Washington at the New York Islanders. Vancouver at Carolina, Chicago at the New York Rangers, Arizona at Detroit, San Jose at Toronto, St. Louis will play Nashville on the road, and Florida is at Minnesota, Anaheim is at Dallas, and Columbus is at Edmonton, Big C. So a lot of good things going on in the world of the NHL, but we all know that we love football. You know, basketball and baseball is about to get started as well. A lot of good things happening with college.
You guys got a couple hockey teams out there in the corner in California. How the hell that happened? Man, you got no snow out there. It ain't cold.
It's bad.
It ain't cold in San Jose. It ain't cold in LA. It ain't cold in Anaheim. So how in the hell has California got 3 hockey teams and Canada only has 5?
Well, Big C, that's called money, because there's a lot of money in California, those good old boys. You know they can make the ice, Big C. They don't have to wait for it to fall out of the sky like you guys ice and moonshine down south.
We're grown men down there, okay?
Yeah. And the last thing I want to touch on, Big C, and we love what we do so much in this world of sports, I want to congratulate all of these young kids around the country that are finishing up on their finals for the championship series, and the California CIF football state playoffs are going on here in California. They're going to be at Sacramento State on Saturday up here in Northern California. Also down in your neck of the wood, Big C, in the South, they have a lot of schools going on. But guess what I heard about one of the high school football programs out of the state of Florida, Big C, down in your neck of the woods where all the good old football players come from the SEC. There's a school, and I might be wrong because I just heard it by one of the sports suppliers that we work with. They were saying there's a school called IMG Academy out of Florida, and I may have heard it wrong, but I believe they said it's $84,000 to go to that school over 4 years. For a high school, that's more than a college, Big C. Maybe I heard it wrong. I know there's some private schools in Northern California. De La Salle, that's going to be out of the Bay Area. They'll be in the state championship game playing against St. John Bosco out of Los Angeles. These are private schools. But does that make sense for a private school to cost $80,000 over 4 years, Big C? Does that make any sense at all, Big C?
Well, I'm talking for that much money, they should just bill you the diploma. You should have to go to school.
Yeah.
Just meet you at the end of your college career.
Yeah.
When we think about this country and education, I understand that you pay for a particular environment.
Yeah.
That you want your kids to be involved in, where you're prepping them to be the leaders in this country.
Yeah.
But to have to pay $80,000+, Charlton, to
that's
educate
crazy.
a young person, I mean, we're talking about extortion.
Yeah.
Are teachers doing this because they care about teaching, or are they doing this for profiteering? When you look at these private schools, Charlton, what you're doing is that you're eliminating and you're creating separatism in society.
Yeah.
Okay, you're eliminating opportunities that some people can never achieve. And so this is what we have in separation of state and power in America, Charlton.
Yeah.
You're separating mental and academic power. And those people that you put in that type of situation, Charlton, they'll never be turned down in life.
Yeah.
With those who have to struggle and may be equally as talented, but they won't have that same paperwork following them, Charlton, and the background lenient saying, I went to this elite academy and I was an honor roll student versus being a public school honor roll student.
Yeah.
Society looks at that different. And what we're doing, Charlton, and what society is doing is creating separation between those who can and those who cannot achieve, Charlton.
Yeah, and I think that's been seen all over the country. I met someone recently that's in the music industry, and she was talking about how much she's been able to go out and perform. She actually performed live on stage with Yolanda Adams, who's one of the most soulful and best musicians. I think one of the better voices I've ever heard come out of anyone, Big C. But the attitude of trying to make it in that business is very difficult, and you need sponsorship. And the difference between some of these high schools and these colleges is they will pay for the young black talent to come there. If you look at IMG Academy down there in Florida, most of them are African American kids, and maybe some. I'm not trying to judge anybody, but I've rarely seen the parent that's going to pay $84,000 a year for their kid to go to a private high school. Oftentimes they get sponsorships because they come in there and they play athletics and they make the athletic programs better, Big C. So the last thing I want to ask you before we close the show today, and I know you've been big on education and telling people how to get the education. Don't worry about becoming a pro athlete. I hope that it hits home but I know the exploitation will continue, especially with the Bulls coming up. They're going to keep pumping how many uniforms are going to be on the sideline and who's sponsoring these kids. And again, the kids get no money whatsoever. Again, Big C, stress the importance of why they have to get the education. Big C, your thoughts?
Well, Charlton, it's a lifelong journey. And without an education, we see what has occurred with people. When we talk about the documentary 13, when we see the people who are being incarcerated for lack of knowledge, Charlton, a lot of them. Not everybody, but a lot of them.
Yeah.
But you need to know how to keep yourself out of dangerous situations, Charlton. And I'm not talking about just violent situations. I'm talking about dangerous situations that can alter your life, that can alter your future.
Yeah.
And education teaches you these things, Charlton. It teaches you to do the right thing most of the time. And that's what America needs more of. And I'm not talking about a single race. I'm talking about all races, because when we look about America and we think about how America ranks on the world stage education, we're the most powerful country in the world, Charlton. But we only rank 27th on the world stage in education.
Yeah.
27th.
Wow.
So there's no emphasis in America that's put on education. As much as we want to talk about college and high school and grammar school, Charlton, and preschool education, the emphasis in America is not put on education, Charlton. It's about what you can get out of people.
Yeah.
Through exploitation. We exploit more people in this country than any other country. We might look at war-torn countries, Charlton, but they're not educated to the level that America is.
Yeah.
As far as a country with its wealth, to be number one in wealth in the world, Charlton, is also the least educated based on economics of all countries in the world.
Well, Big C, I think it's so important, and I love Charlton and Big C Sports and what we do, because we talk real talk, and I just want to make sure that if you're a young kid, no matter what color you are, make sure you get an education, because it's the only thing you can take with you. Once you use your eligibility, they will kick you out of school, Big C. They don't let you keep coming back. And as we always tell you, every Monday through Friday at 5 o'clock p.m. Pacific Standard Time worldwide, follow Charlton and Big C Sports every Monday through Friday at 5 o'clock p.m. Pacific Standard Time worldwide. Follow Charlton and Big C Sports. We also want to tell you there's never an excuse for domestic violence. If you ever see a woman going through that garbage, please call 911. No woman should have to deal with that garbage on her own. And as we always tell you, we thank you, we appreciate you, and we hope that you have a super fantastic day.